Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about Java constructor. As you all know that all objects that are created must be given initial values, which can be done in two ways. The first way of doing this is to use the dot operator to access the instance variable and then assigning value to them individually. This can be a traditional approach to initialize all the variable of the object in the manner. The second approach takes the help of the methods like getData or initialize abstraction. To initialize each object individually, use a statement like here. I just write val1 dot get data and then 12 and 15. So parameters are here. Here in this lecture, you will be dealing with constructor of the Java and learn about how they are used within a Java program as how they are useful object-oriented programming concept. So here, what are the constructors? Constructor are special members functions whose task is to initialize the object of its class. It is treated as a special member function because its name is the same as the class name. Java constructors are invoked when their objects are created. It is named such object its constructor. The value example provide the data for the object. Example, they are used to initialize an objects. Every class has a constructor. When we don't explicitly declare a constructor for any Java class, the compiler creates a default constructor for the class, which does not have any return type. The constructor in Java cannot be abstract, static, final, or synchronized, and these modifiers are not allowed for the constructor. What are the key points means the rules for writing the constructors. Constructor of a class must has the same name as a class name in which it resides. A constructor in Java cannot be abstract, final, static, and synchronized. Access modifier can be used in constructor declaration to control its access. Example, which other class can call the constructor. Now we just see the characteristics of the Java constructor. An interface cannot have the constructor. Constructor cannot be private. A constructor cannot be abstract. I just told you that cannot be abstract, static, final, native, strict, or synchronized. A constructor can be overloaded. Remember that. Constructor cannot return a value. Constructor do not have a return type, not even void. And construct an abstract class can have the constructor, and the constructor name must be similar to that of the class name inside which it resides. And at the last, constructor are automatically called when an object is created. Instance variables and the methods of the class as known as a member of the class. Remember that. Constructor are not members for the reason constructor cannot be inherited but can be accessed by a subclass. Actually, Java constructor do not get inherited. Only their members like the variables or the methods get inherited. So, declaring a constructor as a final is useless and has no meaning as a constructor cannot be or hidden. Again, Java constructors should not be synchronized as it looks. The object when created and hence As long as the object is not created, any other object can be initiated. Now we have the two types of constructor. First one is the default constructor, which have the no argument constructors. And the second one is parameterized constructor. Now we just see what is a default constructor. So the default constructor which have the no arguments is declared like here I just remove this one and then here I just write public, and the public here is constructor. Okay, and then here I just write system dot out dot print line, and here I just write print line, and then I say this is a default constructor. Okay, so here is a quotation. So this is a default constructor. So this is the syntax of this no argument constructor. Now I just remove this, and here I just write another example of no arguments constructor. So I just import java.input output, and then we have the class name which is the constructor here, and then I just write int, and int is num here. Then I just write string and the name. So now here I just write constructor, and it's a constructor. So this would be invoke while object of the class is created. Now I just write system dot out dot print line, and the print line here is constructor called. Okay, and then we just go to the another class which is the any class name. I just write gfg, and then I just write public static void main, and then it's an string, and so public static void main, and then string and arguments. Okay, so here I just write constructor, and I just copy this one and paste it here. So constructor is cons, which is equal to new constructor. Okay, so that this would invoke the default constructor here. Now I just write system dot out dot print line, and the print line here is cons dot name, and then system dot out dot print line, which is cons dot name. Okay, so this is a value of the default constructor which is provided by the default value of the object like 0 or null. Now now we just go to the another example of this constructor. So here I just remove this, and now we have the library which is java.input output, and then we have the public class instructor. Now here I just write public, and then I just write constructor. Okay, so this is the constructor, and then here I just write system dot out dot print line, and the print line here is I am inside of default constructor. Okay, and now I write public static void and void the main here, and then I just write a string and the arguments. Okay, and now I just create an object. So constructor, which is cons is equal to new constructor. Okay, so this is our default constructor, and the value of the default constructor is here. When you just run this code, so you can see I am inside of the default constructor. Now we just see Java parameterized constructor. A constructor that has parameters is known as parameterized constructor. If we want to initialize the field of the class with your own values, then use parameterized constructors. Here is an example of parameterized constructor. So we have the class name, which is parameterized, and I just write cons. Now here I just write parameter, and then I just make a default constructor here. Now system dot out dot print line, and the print line here I just write default constructor. Okay, now here I just copy this name and then paste it here. So this is our class name as a default constructor. So now here I just parameterize constructor with two integer arguments. So here I just write parameterize, and then I just write here int I as a parameter and int j as a parameter. Now here I just write system dot out dot println, and here I just write constructor with two parameters. Okay, and then here I just create the parameterized constructor, which is a class, and then I just write three integer as arguments. So int I, int j, and at last int k. So it is a integer k. Now here I just write system dot out dot print line, and the print line here is constructor with three parameters. Okay, now here I just write the parameterized constructor with two arguments. One is an integer and one is a string. So parameterized cons, which is integer I and string name. So here's the bracket, and then I just open the program body. So system.out.println, and the print line here is constructor with int and string parameters. Okay, so here quotations. Now I just write public and static void main, and then string and arguments. Now I just invoke the default constructor. So parameter obj, which is equal to new parameter construct. Okay, so object, and I just create an object to the default constructor. Now I just write parameterize object number 2, which is equal to new parameterized constructor. So this will invoke the constructor with two int parameters like this one. So I just called an object here for integer I and integer j. Parameterized constructor object 3, which is equal to new parameterized constructor. So I just create an object for this one. So this is the object for three integer parameters. And at the last, which is important one, object number 4, which is equal to new, and then the parameterized constructor. So I just pass the value here, which is 1, and then here I just write Java. Okay, so I just run this code so you can see. First one is a default constructor, then the default constructor, then the default constructor, and at the last we have the constructor with integer and the string parameters. Why we take three default and constructor here? Because we just not add our parameters in the object, like we cannot pass our parameters in the object. So the default constructor is because this is an empty parameters. So now here I just write 12 and 12. This is the value to our object number 2. So I just save this and run. So you can see constructor with two parameters. You can see here. Then I just write 13, 15, 14. Okay, so you can see it will tell us the constructor with three parameters, and this is our default constructor because we didn't pass any of the value in this constructor. So here we see another example of parameterized constructor. So this is example of a weird compilation error. While we discussing a default constructor, we have seen that when we do not create a default constructor, Java compiler inserts the default constructor into the code on our behalf. However, this is not always true. Now we see this example, and I just create a new class here, and the class name is parameterize constructor number 2 and .java. Here I just copy this class name and use as a default constructor. So parameterize, pass the parameters 1 int j. So int I and j here, and then I just write system.out.println and then parameterize constructor, and I just forget to close this code. Yes, and then I write parameterized constructor and passing the parameters, three parameters, I, int j, int k, and then here I just write system.out.println, and the print line here is parameterized constructor, and here I just write public static void main. Okay, and then string arguments, and here I just write parameterize constructor 2, which is the object is equal to new parameterized constructor. Okay, so it will be give us the compiler runtime error. So you can see exception in thread main java.lang error unresolved compilation program. Sorry, the problem. The constructor parameters is undefined. So the program throw the except compilation error because the statement example like statement parameterize constructor 2 and the object which is equal to new parameterized cons 2 is trying to invoke the no argument constructor which we don't have in our program. You don't get the error if you remove the parameterized constructor from this code. This is because if you do not have any constructor in your class, Java compiler insert default constructor into your code on your behalf. However, if you implement any constructor, then you no longer receive a default constructor. Like here you can see I just add the construct parameter 2 because this is 1, and then here I just passed 12, 18 and 19. So I will receive no longer error. You can see construct parameterized constructor 2, and if we have these two parameters, so we have parameter construct. So these are the constructors and the types of constructor in Java. Thanks for watching this lecture. See you in next lecture.